What is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we will be hopping into 5 must start wide receivers for week 1 of the 2023 fantasy football season. I can't believe week 1 is finally here. I'm so incredibly excited for this coming fantasy season. If you guys are new to the channel, I do kindly ask that you guys consider subscribing on the way in. All we do here is free fantasy football content all year round, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. So if you're into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in. But more importantly, guys, get in the comment section down below and feel free to ask me any fantasy questions you guys have for the upcoming week. Starts, sits, trades, waiver wire, whatever it may be. Let me know down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Without further ado, let's hop into today's video. So for the purpose of today's video, we aren't going to be going over wide receivers like Tyreek Hill or Jamar Chase, AJ Brown. We are looking at players who might be on your bench, who might be in your flex spot at the moment, who maybe you're not 100% confident in, or maybe you're considering another bench player. So let's take a look at 5 guys that I think should absolutely be in lineups moving into week 1. Number 1 for me is Christian Kirk of the Jacksonville Jaguars going up against a very poor Indianapolis Colts secondary. When we look at Kirk last year, your wide receiver 11 in full PPR formats, 84 receptions, just over 1,100 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns, and obviously the elephant in the room, Calvin Ridley's on this team. I get it. Ridley's going to see a good amount of targets in this game. He's going to get his opportunities against this defense as well. But I talked about this a lot last offseason about, players like Jalen Waddle with the acquisition of Tyreek Hill to that offense. I talked about, DeVonta Smith, people not believing in him because AJ Brown was joining that team. And I told you guys, it's going to be okay. Sometimes an alpha wide receiver joining an explosive, dynamic offense is really good for a wide receiver too. And I think when we look at Ridley and Kirk, Ridley is going to take the top off the defense. He's going to take a lot of that defensive pressure while Kirk lines up in the slot and is going to just get a ton of targets. He's going to be that security blanket for Trevor Lawrence. And ultimately, I think he's going to put up a very nice stat line against the Indianapolis Colts, especially in full PPR formats. So if you own Christian Kirk, don't be afraid to start him whatsoever. I see him having a very good week 1. Number 2, I've got Christian Watson of the Green Bay Packers going up against the Chicago Bears, a pretty lackluster secondary for the Bears. And I think right now there are some fantasy managers out there who believe in the upside of Christian Watson, but maybe you have another player on your roster who maybe feels a little bit safer because we still have Jordan Love at quarterback here. We're not 100% certain what to expect out of Watson, but I really think Watson's going to light it up in week 1. Like I said, a bad Bears secondary. This is going to be a fun matchup. I'm really looking forward to this, but I really think that Watson is a perfect flex play this week. When you look at what he did throughout the preseason and training camp, he's been lighting it up. And Jordan Love has done a phenomenal job, at least from what we've seen. I know it's, preseason, practice, whatever, making that connection to Christian Watson. But I think there was enough in his rookie season, 41 receptions, 611 receiving yards, and 7 receiving touchdowns. I get it. Maybe you think he's a little bit touchdown dependent. It was just the second half of the season. Jordan Love isn't Aaron Rodgers. I get why there's some question marks here, but guys, you kind of want that upside in your flex spot anyway. Sometimes boom or bust is okay, but I really think here in week 1, Christian Watson is going to boom. He should be in your starting lineups as we approach the first week of fantasy football. All right, number 3, I've got DeVonta Smith, and I know I said at the beginning of the video I wasn't going to name obvious players. Obviously, with the draft capital you spent on DeVonta Smith, you're probably starting him either way. But I do think there are going to be fantasy managers out there who are a little bit worried about this matchup against the New England Patriots. I mean, even with all of the momentum that the Eagles have coming off of that incredible offensive year last year, going into week 1 after losing the Super Bowl, going up against Bill Belichick and a really good Patriots defense, something about it I think is probably going to make some of you guys queasy. But what is Bill Belichick really good at? Belichick is really good at finding that one X factor and taking it off of the table for an opposing offense. So I think when we look at this, he's probably going to look at AJ Brown and say, how can we eliminate AJ Brown from this game? Or maybe he's going to look at Jalen Hurts as a rusher and say, how do we eliminate Jalen Hurts as a rusher? I think that DeVonta Smith is going to get a good amount of volume every game, but I think this game especially, the defensive plan by the Patriots should result in kind of forced volume for DeVonta Smith, and I think he's going to remind us why he is such a good, consistent wide receiver. And I think he's going to get enough targets and really show up in this game that in full PPR formats, he should have a very nice stat line. While the defense, I think, will primarily be focusing on AJ Brown. We talked about that with Christian Kirk. Those alpha wide receiver ones really help out an incredibly talented wide receiver two like DeVonta Smith. And I think that's really going to shine here in week one. So if you own DeVonta Smith, don't be afraid of the matchup. He should be in your starting lineups moving into week one. All right, number 4 overall, I've got Brandon AIYUK of the San Francisco 49ers going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. When we look at AIYUK last year, your wide receiver 15 in full PPR, very underrated going into this season. A guy I've talked a ton about here on the channel, but just over 1,000 receiving yards off of 78 receptions and 8 receiving touchdowns. Now, this week one game against the Steelers kind of feels like a trap game. You know, it's in Pittsburgh. I feel like the Steelers could really show up. I feel like this might end up being a relatively low scoring game and maybe even an upset by the Steelers. But ultimately, I look at AIYUK from a fantasy perspective as the primary wide receiver one on this team. The defense is going to look at Debo as a wide receiver one, but once again, I think that helps AIYUK, and I think that the targets are going to be there for AIYUK, kind of similar to what we talked about with DeVonta Smith. I think he's going to be force-fed targets and volume just due to the game script of this matchup. And I think AIYUK's going to come out with a very nice stat line. I don't think he should be on your bench. I think in full PPR formats, he's going to have double-digit numbers in week one. And ultimately, while the Steelers defense looks pretty good on paper, at the end of the day, they weren't very good as a secondary last year. And I do think a lot of that defensive pressure is going to be reliant on Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and CMC. AIYUK's going to slide out of there, and I think he's really going to have a lot of nice opportunities. AIYUK should absolutely be in your starting lineup moving into week one. All right, number 5 overall, last but not least, this one might seem obvious, but I've been getting a lot of questions about Jahan Dotson moving into week one. At the time I'm recording this, we don't 100% know what Terry McLaurin's situation is going to look like with the turf toe injury. Is he going to be out there week one or not? But regardless, Jahan Dotson going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Are you kidding me? This is a dream matchup. Can't think of anyone on this Cardinals defense other than Budda Baker, who I'm surprised didn't force himself a trade in this offseason. This team is hot garbage. Sorry, Cardinals fans, but I think you guys know that. And Dotson has looked really good throughout the preseason. He was lighting it up. I get it, it's just preseason. But when we look at his rookie season, through 12 games, 523 receiving yards off of 35 receptions, 7 receiving touchdowns. He was one of the best contested catch receivers in the entire NFL last year. A smaller sample size, I get it, but still Dotson, extremely talented. He's a great flex play. He's going to bring that upside similar to Christian Watson. I absolutely love him this week. The chemistry between him and Sam Howell has looked phenomenal. If you own Dotson, he's a smash flex play. And guys, I've even heard of him becoming available in some leagues. Guys, Dotson should not be available. He should be rostered in all formats, and he really might flourish into kind of like a DeVonta Smith territory where he's, the wide receiver 2 on the roster behind McLaurin, but he really, from a fantasy perspective, is a wide receiver 1. Dotson, if you got him, he's in your flex this week. He's an absolute must start as we approach week 1. And that's going to do it for today's video. There are 5 must-start wide receivers approaching week 1 of the 2023 fantasy football season. Guys, if you found today's video helpful in any way, or if you just enjoyed the content, or if you just want more fantasy football content in your algorithm, dynasty, redraft, and best ball all year long, that's all we do here. Be sure to subscribe on the way out. But more importantly, guys, like I said at the beginning of the video, any fantasy football questions that you guys have, starts, sits, trades, waiver wire, whatever it may be, general excitement for week 1 of the season, drop it down below in the comments. I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. With that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.